This episode of Shadiversity is brought to you by the Castles shirt, because castles are awesome and you want to let your friends know that not only are they awesome, but you know that they are awesome, as evident by this awesome shirt with an awesome castle on it. But not just any castle, I'm talking about a historically accurate, properly designed, high-detailed castle with all the bells and whistles. Available through Teespring, link in the description.
Shadiversity.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and I've been intending to make a video on super strength for quite a while now, and then Kyle Hill from Because Science made one before me. Dang it! So you really should go watch his video because he did an awesome job on it, but that's not to say that I don't have additional thoughts to share, so this is going to be kind of like a reply video to him, but not contradicting or disagreeing with him. I actually agree with him really on every single point, but rather I'm going to be expanding on some of the points that he mentioned and also offering some solutions to the problems that he proposed. The first issue that Kyle brings up is the problem with interacting with your own environment, and it's never really struck me as an issue, and he even answers it for the same reason why I never thought it was an issue, is that you could just give the superhero, and it's funny, it's just hand wavy him, you know, whatever, it's because of magic essentially. Just give the superhero super sensitivity, where he has the ability to apply the exact amount of strength that he wants to in any given circumstance or situation, so he won't go around breaking things apart with simple interaction. And he explains that at the end of his video as well, so that's not really an issue. The next point that I want to explore a bit further is the concept of Newton's third law. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That is of course true, but there are certain things that can produce results that we might not have exactly expected. For instance, how much energy can any given surface absorb as opposed to the surface or object or whatever that's coming in contact with it? Good example of this are bouncy balls. The reason why super bouncy balls bounce so much is that when they come in contact with another surface, most of the energy in that collision is actually redirected into the ball itself, which causes it to bounce really, really far off. But if you throw a ball that's particularly dense and isn't very good at absorbing energy and you throw it at something, it might dent or lodge inside something rather than bouncing off. And more energy is transferred into the surface that the ball is being thrown at. Of course, in the analogy I just gave, the ball is being impacted with as much energy as its target. It's just a matter of how much the material it is made out of is capable of absorbing that energy and indeed redirecting it. When a bouncy ball hits a wall, the wall is denser and is of course anchored in place, which means its overall resistance to external force is going to be far greater, and so when it's impacted with this force, its resistance is greater than the bouncy ball, and that energy which the wall or target did receive is then redirected back into the bouncy ball, which makes it appear that the bouncy ball got impacted or received more energy in the collision, which is really just the end result after the equal exchange of energy from the first initial part of the impact, and then what happens to that energy after. A great example of this is this video on metallic glass. I'll put a link to the original video in the description, but here I'm just going to cut out the main key points.
And so what I have in front of you is a couple of pieces of stainless steel. And here on my left is stainless steel as we all know and love and use in everyday life. And so what I have in my hand here is a ball bearing. As I drop the ball, it has kinetic energy. It's going to strike the surface, and that energy is going to be transferred into the surface. This piece of stainless steel is going to receive that energy by deforming, and that deformation is made possible by a movement of dislocations. And so what's going to happen is as this ball hits the surface, the dislocations are going to move, and that's going to absorb energy. That energy that is absorbed is no longer going to be in the ball bearing, and so as a consequence, the ball bearing will bounce, but not very far. So let's see that in action. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of metal, which we've previously described as being crystalline, and I'm going to change that crystalline nature to amorphous. So now we're going to do the exact same experiment. I'm going to drop the ball, but now it's going to land on a piece of this amorphous metal, or what we call metallic glass. And let's see how that changes the behavior. So now, since this material is amorphous, the dislocation movement mechanism is no longer present. And so as a consequence, there's no really easy way to transfer the energy from that ball into the surface of that material. And so as a consequence, more of the energy goes back into the ball. And so the ball continues to bounce and bounce and bounce.
And so this, of course, will apply to people with super strength. Depending on how much energy could be redirected back into them would depend on how dense and durable they are. And superheroes with super strength generally are very, very durable. So we could expect that more energy in this collision gets transferred into the object that's being struck by the superhero than back into the superhero themselves. But of course, they are going to feel a decent amount of energy kickback thanks to, Newton's third law. And the thing that I find people don't consider in regards to this isn't necessarily the strength and, the kickback of the force, but the actual weight of the superhero themselves and the amount of friction that they have anchoring themselves in place. You see, it's not necessarily a matter of how much energy gets thrown back into them to cause injury to themselves, because, they're dense and they're also got super durability and other things like that. But if that energy is greater than their own friction and weight, then they will be pushing or kicking or knocking themselves back at a decent amount. The thing that would enable them to transfer more energy into their target would actually be if they had greater inertia or something to anchor themselves in place. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people miss in regards to the superhero discussion. People with super strength are rarely ever given at a proportional increase in weight, which then increase their inertia to offset and also enable them to transfer much more force into the things that they're punching, kicking, or whatever. I actually get to talk about this concept a lot in my video, The Problems with Super Large Swords, because it's an interesting discussion about super strength, but more importantly, how that super strength would interact with you lifting and throwing around something really, really heavy. In fact, in thinking about this in my, imperfect way, I generally find that super weight could actually be a far more significant superpower than super strength. There is a lot of inconvenience around this. For instance, walking around, getting in cars and other things like that. If you walk into any home that's on stumps, you're probably going to put your foot through the floor. Sitting on chairs will just crush underneath you. But if you had the ability to regulate your weight, this could be really, really significant. The problem that would come in, you still need the super durability. The super durability seems to be a necessary superpower to just make things work, and is usually always given with super strength, but you would need this if you were to given super weight. Because of much greater mass, because that's what we're essentially talking about. When we say someone has super weight, weight is actually a property of gravity, where we're really talking about the mass of an individual. And with the ability to increase your mass gives you an ability to have a much, much higher amount of momentum, which means force on impact. You see, with super strength, it seems like what you're really only able to do with super strength, say a superpowered punch, right, is you're only able to accelerate your fist and hand much quicker than you were before, because you can apply more strength to the mass of your hand, therefore accelerate into a faster speed. How fast are you really able to accelerate it with super strength? Because super strength isn't super speed. It just means you're not really inhibited by the weight of your arm. So it just kind of means you'd be able to throw, it'd be like you're not lifting anything. There'd be no weight in your arm because you're so strong. So that means the overall force you'd be able to produce out of super strength probably isn't that great. A super fast punch would create much more force than a punch that has a lot of strength behind it. Because the other thing is, looking at the mechanics, okay, when you throw a punch, you have such super strength that nothing is really going to inhibit you from making your arm extend fully into the full-length punch. But if you have no weight there with it, all right, as soon as you hit the wall, nothing's inhibiting you from doing that motion, you're just going to be pushing yourself back, kind of like what Kyle says in his video. You'd only be able to punch through something if the thing that you're hitting has less inertia than you, or its structural strength is lesser than the force you're able to produce in that motion. The other thing, separate to speed, that could produce huge amounts of force is mass, okay? Increase the mass, because what is momentum? Momentum is a combination of velocity and mass, and so if instead of increasing velocity, you have the mass, and then even if you were to throw a punch, right? If you were to be able to throw a standard speed punch with incredible super mass in your fist, arm, or just whole body generally, because your body, you can throw your whole weight of your body into a punch, you could produce insane amounts of force. Much more so than super strength. So again, whenever I've considered this, I've always thought, supermass is actually a more efficient, result or property that would give you the appearance of super strength than pure super strength itself. And for anyone who is about to bring it up, I know Brandon Sanderson does this in his books, okay? Furuukami, increase and decrease mass. And this is something that I even, thought about somewhat before even reading Brandon Sanderson, but it is awesome to see that certain creators, Brandon, he's a writer, are already incorporating this idea of concept into fantasy and fiction and stuff like that. In fact, my own writing, I enjoy that as well, because in the book that I'm getting ready for publication, that's one of the properties he can do. He can increase and decrease his own mass, and he uses that for some very fun results. Because the thing is, you have to think about the consequences, and I don't even think Brandon has done this fully yet, okay? Increasing your own mass, all right? And if you're able to do it at a, at a regulatory level, whenever you want, if it's not just a permanent set level, that will do crazy things in regards to your inertia, momentum, other things like that, because you have to consider in what state is the mass when it comes, because the mass is kind of appearing out of nowhere. What state is the mass in motion or is the mass stationary? And that's going to affect you to a really large degree, so you've got to consider those things. The thing is, in regards to just huge super strength, Superman actually has a bit of a trump card that he gets to pull out over on top of people who just regular super strength, and it's his flight, all right? Because his flight, the strength that or forces he's able to produce in his flight seems to be proportional to his super strength just regularly. Because when Superman picks something up in flight, he's actually not exerting the actual strength in his muscles. His muscles are helping, support it, but the main force that's being applied to it is the force through his flight. If he's picking something up through flying, it's the flying picking it up. And this means Superman has a very unfair kind of tool to help him achieve the results that we generally see him in super strength and other things like that. For instance, let's do the punching thing. I mentioned that if you had super weight, that increased your inertia and, which would give you more friction to anchor yourself in place, would enable you to transfer far more energy into the wall than being redirected back into you, because if it overcame your inertia and your friction, you'd just knock yourself back. But Superman, he'd be able to hold himself in place through his flight. He's able to exert energy, pressure, or whatever to move his own body through space without pressing on anything else. That's what his flight does. And so he can use his flight to even not only hold himself in place, but push himself forward even more, which means he can just throw massive amounts of energy into anything. And because he has the super durability and stuff like that, yeah, he could fly, punch through walls at will, not a problem. But the thing that he can't do, and this is kind of going on to another point that Kyle talks about, which I'm really glad he brought up. This has been a pet peeve of mine for super strength for a long time. And that's just because you have super strength and you have the ability to lift incredible weights, right, doesn't mean that the thing you're picking up has the structural strength to support its own weight when being picked up from the position that you're picking it up from. The thing where you see, a superhero or whatever, pick up a car from the bumper like this. You wouldn't pick up the car, you would just rip off the bumper of the car. And Kyle's big example is when Superman stops the plane from Superman Returns. But the most egregious kind of sin against this basic principle of physics and logic and structural strength is actually from the new Justice League movie, okay? Where the Flash is trying... Spoilers, all right, if you haven't seen it. You're not missing much, by the way, if you haven't seen it. It was a disappointment. But anyway, the Flash is trying to save, a family and is pushing a car, and Superman is helping him save some people from the big bads or whatever. And he looks to the side and he sees Superman holding a building. He's picked up a building in the center of mass, is holding it and flying the whole building to safety. The amount of stupidity in that scene is just... The building would just snap, all right? Like he would fly through every single floor. And this example Kyle mentions, if you picked up a car, you just punch through the car. If you tried to pick up a building, the building would just fall around you, and you would end up just holding the pit of, roof or whatever that you applied the force to. And so holding a whole flippin' building, the stupidity of that is mind-boggling. There are so few really large-scale objects that you'd actually be able to pick up from any point or anchor or in the center, or for the other thing, if you actually want to pick it up, it needs to be in the center of balance of that object. Otherwise, you'd just be picking up a corner. Like if you went to pick up a car, and you'd rip off the bull bar because there's not enough weight to be levered in that way. I can't really think of any large-scale object in which its own structural strength would be able to support itself if you were to pick up the whole thing, because it would just break from the point you're trying to pick it up from, or break around you if you're trying to pick it up in the center of balance. So then, is it impossible to get that really cool kind of superhero fantasy thing of someone picking up something of ridiculous size as a great manifestation of their super strength? Well, there is kind of a way you could get this look or effect, but it wouldn't be through super strength. No. You would need something rather different, but there's already kind of a superpower that enables it. Telekinesis. This isn't the answer, but this telekinesis will help lead us to the answer. Because telekinesis is an ability to just pick up things from a distance, and generally, I'm assuming, you're not exerting the force on one kind of anchor point when you're picking something up with telekinesis. It seems to be a force that is exerted on the entire thing, really, not just on the underside. It seems to be the forces, you're kind of encasing this whole object in a force, and then you're exerting a force on whichever angle you're wishing to push it on, but that force is being pushed on every single surface facing the direction that you want to push it in. And so with telekinesis, with super strong telekinesis, you can pick up really, really large objects. So if you wanted to do the superhero thing where there's a car here and you just grab it right side and you pick the whole thing up just like that, the only way that I can describe it would be to call it tactile telekinesis, which is funny because that is a phrase that has come up in comic books already. It's essentially the superpower of the original Superboy, but gee, there's so many DC reboots and retcons their stuff way too much, and I'm so sick of it! I have no idea which version of Superboy has this, but anyway, the one where I was reading the Teen Titans version, and Superboy, he always refers, I'm using my tactile telekinesis or whatever, and I never, bothered to actually figure out what the properties of it actually works. But if it's working the way that I'm describing, where you're able to move something telekinetically once you touch it, well then that's how you do it. This is how you can pick up overly sized massive things where you're not actually picking up with super strength. It's just through touch, you now have this connection to the object where you're able to exert a telekinetic force on the whole object itself, not just on the part that you're grabbing it by. And with that, then yes, you could pick up a car from the bumper because you're not actually picking up, you're lifting it with telekinetic powers, and you could pick up a whole building like you see in Superman, Justice League and stuff like that, through tactile telekinesis. And so if this has already been figured out from whoever decided to give Superboy his powers, good on you. But they've probably retconned it or now because of DC. Damn DC. And that's really most of the things that I wanted to talk about and elaborate in regards to Kyle's video, and I still get to make my video on super strength, which I've been wanting to for a long time anyway. But to finish us off, just talking a little bit about the concept of punching someone and which launches them into a really far thing like that. Okay, if you punched a regular person with super strength, Kyle is absolutely right. They'd explode, or you just punch through them and it'd be really, really messy. Generally though, the people getting launched for a really, really far distance when they get a super punch are the superpowered people, and generally they have a level of super durability, like in the Man of Steel. Man of Steel doesn't even have Superman in the title. Okay, in the Man of Steel, where Superman is getting punched, and he is punching other Kryptonians with superpowers who have super strength and density and stuff like that, and is punching them for ages, they get launched off massively. Now, the interesting thing about this does raise that same question, Newton's third law, equal and opposite reaction, and so depending on who gets launched to the further distance, I guess would depend on who had their flight enabled, like anchoring themselves into position. And so Superman if Superman flies in with a punch and the other Kryptonian wasn't ready, they have nothing anchoring themselves right there in that spot apart from their own mass and friction, which isn't anywhere near the amount of force that these superpowered people are able to produce. And then with Superman being added by the force of his super flight, they would get launched however far we see him. And not only would Superman not get knocked back, he would still be moving forward at them. It's when they hit each other with the same level of force and the same, powers at play, pushing themselves with their, flight at the same strength and stuff like that, you'd probably see the big flying apart like you see two billiard balls on a pool table. Equal and opposite reaction because equal mass, equal force and stuff like that, yeah. But that is two superpowered Kryptonians with very equivalent powers and stuff like that. It would always be different depending on how much energy or resistance to energy a person's own density and durability is able, and I'm talking about superpowered people here, is able to withstand, would then depend on how much they would get punched, at a distance. If they're launched for 100 meters or whatever from a single punch, it would be very dependent on the individual properties of these individual super strength people stuff. And there we go. That's what I wanted to talk about in this video. Still Thank you to Kyle for making his awesome super strength video, and damn you for doing it before me. But anyway, I still got to make mine. Thank you for watching, guys. I do hope you've enjoyed, and I'll hope to see you again. Until that time, farewell.